being blunt, on YouTube. Hopefully this week it actually makes it up. I've got Glenn today. Last week I didn't, and obligatory wave. Uh, let's kick off about the things I managed to talk about last week, I guess. I was quite surprised to see that there's actually quite a lot of charging stations for electric vehicles around Australia. You can see there's a map there with the orange being high powered charging stations and the greens
It's a lot
being.
in Western Australia. Oh no, that maps back to front. Sorry, I'm thinking that was Western Australia.
No, 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 that is all of Australia.
Yeah,
Yep, and unfortunately for you, it's back to front, I guess. But for the rest of the people, or it's flipped horizontally simply because of the nature of Google Meet. Um, Last week the week before we talked about the volumes. Could you say a couple of words just to make sure that the volumes are right?
yeah. Can everyone hear me? How's that
I
sound?
That's looking all right, but I can't tell how it is till I actually go on air, or rather, till I put it up, till I
Yep.
look at it in that. So, um, as I was saying to you, Glenn, I was listening to Bob Brown actually on the radio. I think there's a debate that RN was talking about, and interestingly, Bob Brown was talking about the truth and the truth that we don't hear. For example, I mean, interestingly, there is uh, supposedly 7 deaths in Belgium, which I looked up, and there is. They're mainly old people, fairly old people, 80s and 90s, but they were fully vaccinated.
Yep.
So, and yesterday I had a chat with a whole bunch of other people that I do on a regular basis once a month over Zoom, and we were talking about, what next? What's going to happen next? And we're postulating on how is this whole thing going to pan out? Is the changes that are happening around COVID basically going to, uh, are we actually really going to go into an environment that business can operate as usual? And I think my viewpoint is I don't think we're going to see that for another 2 years.
It's hard to imagine us being able to go back to what things were like in anything much less than that time. We can possibly go to a altered operation, but not back to where it was.
Yeah. Um, and I don't think we need to go back to where it was. I think we need to go back to somewhere different. I
Oh
think,
yeah,
I mean, I wrote to my local minister. He's a representative in Victoria, and said, can you look at this battery thing, this car vehicle to household, or vehicle to grid, or vehicle to X, any site thing, and see whether you can promote it within the government, because the Victorian government isn't doing anything in that space. The ACT government certainly has bought something like 52 Leafs and had a trial. So there's activity that I think that the government can basically engineer or encourage within business to go more green.
yeah. I think one thing that's happening is we're seeing each state government is one person leading the move in each government, and they're running with somewhat differing priorities. If they can all start to sing off the same song sheet, they can learn from each other, and more things can happen more quickly. But it may actually be coming down to the focus of individual ministers in different states because they're all doing things. They're just not all doing all the same things.
Well, I mean, theoretically, we've actually got Arena who sit behind the whole thing and should be acting as a guide. And they've got lots of research. the Australian Arena, basically, I believe, is the Australian research organisation that is dealing with renewable energies.
They're my understanding is they're sort of lead funder for early to mid stage research and commercialization. And then the Clean Energy Finance Corporation takes over when things get to the later stages.
Right. So it's the early stage activity that they do, the Arena does, and the Clean Energy Council basically deals with implementation or industrialization, as some people
Yeah.
might describe it. Yeah.
Yeah. And ARENA isn't just pure research, it's actually taking things that are beyond the research stage and getting into prototype stage and proof of concepts and that type of work.
Yeah, and a little bit of why I went to the minister was basically because I picked this up in the Guardian. Um, you know, New South Wales minister, Liberal minister, basically saying, "Vote us out if you if you if you think we're not doing the right thing." And I think they're not doing the right thing. Well, I mean, maybe Berejiklian isn't doing absolutely the wrong thing, but uh, we really need to have a better representation.
Yeah, well, in New South Wales, you got interesting things happen, like Matt Keane's the minister, and he's backing renewable energy zones and all those types of things. But at the same time, there's still approvals for gas exploration and new coal mines and so forth. So it's the right hand and left hand not working together stage at the moment for state governments. At least one hand is doing something, but they haven't yet got to the point of saying, no, we're not doing any more of that. So it's sort of halfway house.
Yeah, it's lacking consistency or lacking
Yeah.
coherence. I mean, that you'd expect to happen in a government that we have at the moment because it does not seem to put down, not only just in writing, it just does not seem to put down its ideas about the future much before they release it.
Yeah, it's like it's been a failure of government at national and state level that it's not communicating with the whole population, saying we've got to go in this direction. So it's putting out policies that one part of the population want, but then saying to another section of the population, "Don't worry, we'll still do some coal for a while." So they're not willing to say to some people, "No, sorry, this is over." No
Yeah,
one's willing to do that yet.
yeah, it's like they just to put it in the vernacular don't have the balls to do much. They want to straddle the fence as long as possible because that means, uh, unfortunately, we don't do much as a country. We don't move forward as a country, but at the same time, they don't lose the people that they think are basically holding them up in place. So, I mean, looking at that into the future, is this a strategy to head towards an election next year,
It's
avoiding.
hard to, is this a whole of government strategy, or is it just different ministers who've got their own little patch and they're sort of saying, no, 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 this is my patch, this is how I do it? I really don't know. Um, I think we can sort of overthink that governments do grand strategy when often it's a bit more shambolic than that.
Hmm. Highly controversial, wouldn't you think? That they, well, I mean, they purport to be coordinated.
Yeah, but then you look at, say, Matt Keane saying one set of things, and then John Barilaro, the head of the Nationals at the state level, says quite different things. There's politics inside governments just as much as there is politics between political parties, and the turf wars inside can often be more destructive.
Yeah, well, we've seen that from the continual revolving door around prime ministers of the liberal variety.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and even within Labor, you've still got those sort of divisions with people like Joel Fitzgibbon.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just not. a consistent environment that we could say, uh, you know, people are clear about what's going on. Yeah, to a certain extent, you almost go, maybe the Chinese have it right to have a strong dictatorial government.
China, I think internally, China and the Chinese Communist Party is just as political and faction ridden,
You
with
just
an
we don't see
illusion that
it.
we have. Yeah, we don't see it as clearly. I remember seeing a report a few months back about how the number one lead national environmental agency in China, which has a lot of clout, had sent a please explain letter to one of the major energy authorities saying, why are you doing so much coal? It's against national policy. So even inside China, there's factions and politics and all sorts of things.
Has has um has Scott Morrison got a point that China is the biggest emitter and really we should be looking at them doing something serious?
China is now the biggest emitter, so we do need them to do something serious. Uh, that isn't a get out of jail free card for us because historically the West is the biggest emitter of what's in the atmosphere at the moment. China now emits more, but cumulatively through your life and mine, we've emitted more per person than any Chinese citizen has. So we have a historical obligation for what we did in the past.
Uh, I mean, I totally agree with the fact that we need to protect ourselves into the future by moving off coal ASAP.
Yeah.
Uh, but I can't see that Australia specifically has been a high emitter.
Oh, well, per person, yes, we have.
Yeah?
Uh, Long term, we have. Um, we're still per capita one of the highest emitters in the world. We emit more per person than the US does. We emit 3 or 4 times per person what someone in China does. And I think there's only a few tiny countries that are heavily, powered by diesel or whatever, where the per capita emissions are higher than us. We're still up at the top of the heap per person.
And is that because we literally are chewing through coal by the minute?
It's chewing through coal. It's we like having large cars and diesel. It's we use gas to heat our homes. It's we just have a high energy Western lifestyle, and we don't have the more densely packed cities that you might get in Europe. So our sprawling suburbs makes for higher energy use. All of these are contributing factors. We drive further than someone in a European city has to get to work. Things like that.
I do believe we have a very different viewpoint of distance. When I was a child living in Malaysia, it was uh, the distances that I would drive today would be something you would do once a year.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's something that has progressively changed over my lifetime in Australia. My childhood was in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, but Dad walked to the station and took the train to get to work in the city. Now people would drive. So all those changes have happened in one lifetime.
Yeah. And looking at the current situation, I'm driving more simply because I'm worried about COVID. Um,
Yeah,
the local situation here is that in Oakley, for example, there's a whole stack of apartments that basically have gone into tier two. There's a um, Chinese or Asian large Asian supermarket that basically has become a tier two uh, in Clayton, not far away.
yep,
Uh, and the continuing situation that we actually have, I think there's something like 70 plus again today.
yeah. And the majority of those were out infectious in the community before they were detected.
Yeah, it seems like the threshold for people's tolerance to follow rules has been blown and has been blown so drastically. that they're not we're not going to get back. We're just going to go head forward into a Sydney situation.
I think so. Um, we may not get there as quickly as Sydney did, but unless this thing of people like Daniel Andrews has been saying it in the last day or two in the press conferences, don't have symptoms for 6 days before you get tested. Get tested as soon as you get a sniffle, and enough people aren't doing that.
Yeah, yeah, and the situation of the Delta variant where there are significant spreaders who basically are asymptomatic means you've got no, you've almost got no chance.
The other thing is with the how highly infectious it is. There's also the real problem of the essential things that have to stay open, like supermarkets, become spreader events. You can't shut the supermarkets; people have to get food. So, and there are a certain number of jobs where people have to go to work. So we actually can't lock down enough based on the how infectious this is. It'd be incredibly draconian restrictions on only one person can go to the supermarket, no one else, and things like that might slow it, but and shut
Yeah,
whole whole
and
industries.
exactly that's happened in Shepparton, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a third of the town is in isolation.
Yeah, 16,000 people are supposed to isolate for 2 weeks. That is
Yeah,
for a town the size of Shepparton. Um,
I think Shepparton's 70,000 people, so yeah, it's
yeah,
about almost 1 in 4.
yeah, quarter of the population. Now imagine us having that kind of problem, uh, compliance problem, as we go towards trying to reduce climate change issues. I hate to see this. I mean, you've spoken many times in the past saying, "Hey, this is just our dress rehearsal."
Yeah, we're not going to tackle climate change by relying on individual actions. It has to be system level changes.
In other words, it has to be proper government planning, not what we discussed earlier or mentioned earlier, not the shambolic approach of let's do it as it happens. We need to actually be thinking forward.
Yeah, there was an article in Slate or the New York Times in the last day or two, sort of can democracies tackle climate change? And it was quite dubious about whether they could.
Is it? I mean, here Daniel Andrews is basically lamenting the fact that the freedom to act, the independence of people that we actually allow as part of our society, is actually becoming a liability.
Yeah, it's
In a strict rules-based situation, we have to put D&D, too little law, too much chaos.
yeah, it's people not recognizing that every freedom we has some sort of limitation on it, and there are times when we have to suspend freedoms, and that's a valid thing to do. Whereas too often the rights and freedoms debate becomes freedoms are always and in every circumstance inviolable, which just doesn't work.
Yeah, I saw a very well crafted anti lockdown um, video that someone sent from outside the country about Australia and a lot of it was using footage in a way that only showed the points that they wanted to show. Like they
Mm.
showed children being pulled away and they claimed it was to be jabbed, where that's not actually happening. They showed riots in the street, which yes, there were people in the street very recently, 4,000 fold, but there's 4 million plus still sitting in their homes avoiding
Yep.
the streets, and a lot of this basically and fronted by an attractive person, basically using very emotive words, and you go, I'm sure there's a you know a lot of people who are looking at this and going horrified and saying, "Oh, the government's actually trying to get us."
Yeah, well, it's got similarities to what was happening in America with the various Black Lives Matter demonstrations. The vast majority of them were peaceful, but many people think the vast majority of them weren't. It all depends what gets put in front of your eyeballs.
Yeah, and reflecting the fact that we do need media that is truthful, that we do need media that is focused on informing to, I suppose, a level that is blunt. It's not not trying to not trying to disguise things. And
Yeah, well,
unfortunately, yeah,
most of what social media and the internet now gives us isn't media in the old sense. It's just anyone can put up a soapbox and more, that can be seen by more than half a dozen people. They could be seen by millions of people, but it's just a dude on a soapbox.
yes, and I suppose this is one of them. This is a person, two people on a soapbox, but
Yeah.
uh, I'd hope that anything that I put up basically is checkable and checked to say, I mean, I believe in it. I do see that this stuff is done truthfully. I don't want to put stuff up that is, you know, a creation just to get a result.
Well, I suppose this basic human nature goes on here. If if accurate information isn't conveying the message I want to convey, why would I use accurate information? If I want to convince you of something, I'll put up what I think will convince you.
I mean, that's an old sales trick, right? Uh, don't let the truth get in the way of the sale.
Yeah.
It's an old sales trick, and as a sales trick, it is reprehensible. As a way of life, it is unconscionable.
Yes, it is. But then for other people, it's not because in their mind, the purpose for why they're doing it is justified.
Mm.
That's where you hit the brick wall.
That's where you do hit the brick wall. That's where you do hit the statement that was stated in this video was more around the lines of um, where did Hitler start? You know, all these restrictions. This is where Hitler started. This is
Mm.
where the Nazis started. This is how the fear of putting the idea of a fear of a totalitarian state, which actually is trying to support and change the environment for the better of the majority of people. It's hard.
Yeah, like if you think back to, or not think back to, but the years leading up to Hitler and through the Weimar Republic and everything, the people of Germany had gone through World War One, they'd lost, they'd suffered, and then all those years afterwards, things were bad. How well did every single German in the street understand why it was like that? Because as soon as you get a situation where a lot of people don't know why things are bad, others can come along with a narrative and say, this is why it was bad. And that's what Hitler did. If everyone understood the reasons why the situation was bad, they would have listened to him and said, no, dude, you're wrong. But people didn't understand.
But if you look at this in on the climate change environmental situation, it seems like we know why it's bad. It's actually out there being talked about for oh when only from as early as 1970s.
In the public space, yeah. Uh, in reports, the first report to government about it was in 1965. The first scientific comments about it were in the late 50s.
Yep.
But this wasn't in general public consciousness, even in the 70s and the 80s. For most people, climate change has only bubbled up to something they were aware of in the last 5 or 10 years. Most people don't follow the news. Most people would never have heard of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Most people live their lives disconnected from this stuff.
Most people should have heard of that by now.
Why? By now they should have, but 10 years ago, why? What media do they follow? Do they people who don't watch any news?
Yeah,
People only read the sporting pages in the newspaper.
so really,
We're news junkies. Most people aren't.
what I need to do if I want to change the narrative is to start appealing to people who watch sports.
Yeah, all sorts of things. This needs to appear in every type of conversation that people have, not just, oh, that stuff on the media. And climate change until recently wasn't visible. Now it's starting to be visible, and people are sort of going, oh, wait a minute. But 10 years ago, people couldn't see climate change.
So, I mean, in the States, if it was appearing in baseball games and US um, football, if it was appearing,
Sitcoms, Oprah was talking about it. It was there appearing there in used car ads, whatever.
well, I mean, in used car ads, that would be a broad leveler, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much most people want to have some form of transport. So, realistically, one of the things, flipping back to this diagram of charging stations, the fact is, there are charging stations. There's heaps of 500 of them there, actually.
Yeah.
Not thousands, but we're, and this is recent, right? This is 500 of them out there. Whereas people aren't really happy about buying a electric car simply because they don't think the facilities are there.
I think that's changing. Surveys recently are suggesting that two-thirds of people would consider an electric car for their next vehicle. So it's changing. Yeah, they're at that maybe stage rather than
Yeah, but they're not.
rejecting it.
They're not. They generally wouldn't be driven because of environmental concern. They're more driven because, at the present time, there's actually not going to be any very many alternatives if most car companies are going to hit to go 100% electric.
That's true, but I don't think most people realise most car companies are doing that. Not yet, not in Australia. That again, that's sort of news junkie knowledge that most people don't have. But I think what's happening is okay, climate change is sort of real. Going to electric vehicles, yeah, we should do something like that. Oh, look, I've seen the electric vehicle on the road. It works. And people are getting to that. Okay, yeah, I might think about that. They've gone beyond, no, I wouldn't, to maybe. And the next step is, oh, look, my neighbour just got an electric car. My brother in law just got an electric car. Oh, I'll get one. This is the transition of acceptance, and we're
Yeah, I mean,
partway through it.
I've been on conversations with people in the area, and it often, but not always, but it often turns to talking about cars and a variety of things. And one of the things that they are talking about is still buying old or ICE, internal combustion cars. Why? Because of the sound.
Yeah, we've we've had two generations of being, or probably even three generations, sold on the mystique of the car, the freedom of the open road. There's an advertising jingle. We've been trained to think that cars are more than transportation.
Yeah,
You can recognize the difference in the sound of a Harley Davidson versus a Triumph motorbike. Otherwise, hey, what sort of guy are you? All that stuff. Now, Give it another generation or two, that will go. That will be just, this is what our grandparents thought. But we're still in that mindset at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't follow with. I mean, I am much older than these people. Uh,
It's not just an age thing; it's also a segment of society, cultural thing. Back in some years ago, it's gone now. The huge divide between whether you're a Holden man or a Ford man.
yeah,
There's no crossover.
yeah, all right, okay. So maybe I'm a bit off to one side and not
Yeah,
interested in the. I'm more interested in the technology rather than necessarily the vehicle or the status symbol that's it sits on. Like I do know that there was also part of that, where certain people who basically had Japanese cars were
yeah.
considered
Oh,
a
Japanese
different
guy. Yes,
or
exactly.
inferior.
Yeah, and that then comes down to Australian male identity and all the rest of that sort of stuff.
It does. It does.
But that's a generational thing. Give it another generation, that will start to fade away. Um,
So, I mean, I don't think it will actually. I mean, these people that I'm talking to are 16 to 20-year-olds, right? Or 14 to 20-year-olds, 20 something year olds. Uh, and the older they are, okay, I start to accept that they have got some issue around it, simply because they grew up in a internal combustion era.
yeah.
Uh,
But give them a generation, and then when their kids are 16, 20-year-olds and are buying electric cars, as parents, they'll start to go, oh, um, they may change, they may resent it, who knows? But they'll be the last generation that's thinking that.
but we actually won't have that in a generation. We will have that in 10 years.
Yeah, that's going to come as a shock when the people who have no interest in electric cars discover they can't buy internal combustion engine cars. And that's 10 or 15 years away. That's
No,
going to be interesting social dynamic at that point.
yeah, and I'd be really interested to see what the price of petrol will go up to at that point.
It, I cannot picture what the transition out of petrol and petroleum is going to look like. It could be an absolute shambles because you can't take all the internal combustion engine cars off the road simultaneously. So you've got to keep a fuel supply for a shrinking population. I don't know what the end game for this is going to look like. It could be catastrophic, is the wrong word, utterly chaotic.
I mean,
We've never really tried to do this sort of transition before.
I, I we currently see a similar situation, right? We've actually got businesses now who are dying because they can't do the work they can do simply because of the environment. Because of this lockdown, they basically are in such difficult situation they can't sustain their business.
Yep,
That's a similar situation to petrol housing
yep,
at some stage, 10 years down the line, 15 years down, maybe less than 15 years down the line, I'd say, we'd get a situation where we'd have, for trucks to actually deliver the petrol, they'd probably have gone across to electric services.
yep.
The price of petrol will start rising. The demand, the actual, uh, because we import most of it, we don't refine anything here, do we, anymore?
Yeah, we do. We've got four refineries at the moment, although two of them are closing in the next year, I think. So the government's been putting some money in to prop up the remaining two. So we do, although 90% of our imports oil supply comes from overseas, a fair part of that comes in as refined product, but we also bring in raw crude oil and refine it here as well.
So I can just imagine in, 5 to 10 years' time, we have, uh, say, a 50% changeover, price of petrol will be pushing up. You'd you'd have to be rich to basically run a petrol car.
And yet the people who will have internal combustion engine cars will probably have old cars and they're on low incomes. If you've got a higher income, you've gone out and bought an electric car.
So that's where the Tony Seba perspective of uh, transport as a service, the next generation Uber would be a driverless car run on electric, basically offering a service and you buy a subscription.
Yeah, if the full autonomy emerges as quickly as he thinks it will. Uh, like when I contrast trying to get out of fossil fuels for electricity, that's the easy bit. Getting off fossil fuels for transport. It's not that you can't make transport work with electric, you can, but the transition is mind blowing. And it's probably one of those things where in the real democratic countries will do it worse because it actually needs the government to step in and subsidize things and prop the um, oil industry up for a while until we shut it down in a very managed and controlled way and all the rest. Do you see Australia or America being good at doing that? I don't.
I don't know. I don't see. I can't even see till the next election. I can't see how any government that goes in is going to have strong enough um, conviction to do anything.
I think enough people in Labor know what they need to do. They just have no confidence that they can convince the electorate to let them do it.
Exactly. The electorate really needs a lot more um, education, and it's not happening because the current government is literally blindsiding. You know, the Susan Lays of the world.
Yep. Angus Taylor.
Not, it's nothing to see here. It's all working perfectly. We're treating the environment really well, and unfortunately, that's really un- a blatant lie.
Yeah.
Anyway, we have gone past our 30-minute point and is into the
Well, let me
37.
give you and anyone who's listening an example of how we don't hear about things. I'm just wondering how many people in Australia know that in the last week or so they reported the first recording of rain falling on the summit of Greenland, not snow.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just a day, some rain, but it's the beginning of what starts to really melt ice sheets. How much of the media reported that? How many people heard it?
No, no, I hadn't heard that at all.
Yeah,
So, what day was that?
it was sometime in the last week or so. It was reported.
Right. And who actually reported it?
Might have been in the Guardian or the ABC. I need to go back and look.
Right. Okay, I'll look it up and I'll put it up into my list.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Glenn,
Okay. I'll see you Tuesday.
yep, look forward to it.
Okay. Take care, mate.
Cheers. Bye for now.